Hello. Getting all settled in here. Put that. Hello. Good morning, if it's morning, or good day to you, wherever you're at. Hello. I'm very excited to be here and a little bit nervous. Today is my 18th live stream, which I've officially shown up to without my notes, so that's good. I might run and go get those when we actually get to the astrology part, the planned astrology part, that is, where basically we will talk about Mercury retrograde. I'm assuming that we're going to talk about Mercury retrograde. That's what's on the agenda for today. And so if you're catching the replay, you may opt to check out the timestamps and jump straight there. If that's why you came, that's the name of the video. And I can understand why you'd be here for that. However, me personally, I have some energy inside me that must be cleared first. So that's where I'm going to start. And I don't know, I don't have a plan as far as what is going to come out. All I know is that the energy has a life of its own. And it's been with me for about 48 hours, a little bit more than that. And basically, and I wanted to just kind of ask, like, how's your week going? Like, how's your energy this week? Has it been anything? Has it been weird, noticeable, any changes? For me, hello, Crooked Trail. So good to see you. For me, I feel like it was such an interesting, like, real life application of what we talked about last week, with especially Venus entering Aries on May 2nd. So that was Monday, right? I'm pretty sure. Yep. So on Monday, Venus went into Aries, and the big news of this week, one of the big stories, the biggest in my world for sure, was the leak of the potential Supreme Court ruling, I guess it would be called, to potentially overturn Roe v. Wade and women's right to seek abortion in the United States. And this news coming into my system hit me like a thunderbolt, like maybe a perfect example of that Venus and Aries ability to breathe fire over the things that just spark your primal response, you know? Like, I've never gotten like political in these astrology and coffee, and that's not where this is headed. This is not a political issue in my mind. It's a human rights issue, specifically, obviously, female like reproductive system rights. So yeah, it definitely triggered something of a tidal wave that has been moving through my system now for about 50 hours. And like, if you've heard me talk on my channel, I think about my full-time job, like, what is my job in this world? My job is to manage my energy. My job is to, like, clear out my grid when there's ucky stuff present in there. And that tidal wave that was triggered by seeing that news, which, you know, I don't even watch the news, and that headline still found me, you know, like, I'm tuned out of most everything, and still that made its way in. And so there's part of me that has spent the last 50 hours trusting that this tidal wave, even though it feels like nasty, toxic guck moving through my system, that, like, there is something here for me for sure. I mean, I've been tied up in it, like I said, but even the fact that right now, this morning, I can't not clear this out of the way. It's like right in front of my face, that I can't even see past it at this point. So I have to start here. So there must be something in it for anybody, maybe, who's taking this in. I don't know. And I kind of want to lay this down first and start with, I was listening to music earlier, and one of the songs that I have on my US Pluto Return playlist is I Don't Have the Answers by The Messengers, and that song is extremely soothing to me because basically the chorus is like, I don't have the answers and be done, even if we don't have the answers. And I think that's like probably one of the scariest things that human beings can even face is the unknown. Like, we don't know what's going to happen. You know, this news that we're even talking about is just potential. It's not even like, it's not even a set thing. It's not done yet. And yet even just the potential unknown of like, where would this lead? What else would this give way to in terms of rolling back other rights and protections under the law? And the basically seeing that news, having that tidal wave come into my system, all I could think was, I need to watch The Handmaid's Tale. I need to, and I've watched it. I've watched the for sure the first 3 seasons, which I think there's more than that now that I haven't seen. And I've watched the first couple seasons a couple times, and it was like I couldn't not. Like, I had work planned for Wednesday, right? Yeah, Wednesday. And I just skipped it. I just canceled everything. And I spent 12 hours watching season 1 of Handmaid's Tale. And then yesterday I worked for a few hours, and then I spent 12 hours watching season 2 of Handmaid's Tale. And I don't know about you, but like, I'm definitely the kind of person that when I'm scared, when I have fear in my system about anything, I naturally jump to like, what is the worst case scenario that can possibly happen? And if I can mentally prepare myself for that, and if I can like look that devil in the eye, then anything that actually happens is gonna be better than that. So in my mind, like Handmaid's Tale usually represents like worst case scenario of where this path leads. And it's like the terror that I've been sitting with these last couple days, where basically all I did on Wednesday was sit in my bed, watch Handmaid's Tale, and cry. I just like outpoured buckets of energy, and I felt so much melting happening in my core, and all of that was being released from my system. Like, by the time I like really was like looking at like, wow, I'm like 6 hours and like 30 cries into this day, and this is just a weird day. A weird day. This is not how I normally spend my days. But I couldn't not face my own interpretation of like, what is the worst case scenario of what this means for women in this country. And I see, and I don't think I have a point. And that's where that song is like in my head. Like, I don't have the answers, and facing the unknown is scary. And that's where I wonder if it's like maybe even a natural human response to want to like prepare yourself for what you think is the worst case outcome. Um, I don't think I've ever heard that one. I'm gonna have to look that up. I know there's an answer by the Beach Boys. Um, yeah, so I was like pulling tarot cards while I was watching Handmaid's Tale and crying repeatedly. Um, and one of them really helped me, really, really helped me. And actually, I'm gonna grab the book and see about like just even sharing some keywords, because if you're familiar with Light Seer's tarot, which I know the video can be pretty blurry, so I don't know if you can see that super well, but it's a really popular tarot deck. The artistry is absolutely beautiful. But in the front of the book, so like before it gets into describing the cards, it has an exercise where you go through your new deck of cards and you look at all of them, and basically you sort them into light cards and dark cards. And then out of the light pile, you take them and you find the one that feels like the most light to you, like which one is your ultimate light card. And then you do the same with the shadow cards, like the dark cards, like that these bring up negative emotions. So you get down to like which one is like the epitome of the worst emotion you can feel. And so I did it, and I found my light card and I found my dark card. My light card happens to be the Knight of Wands for whatever reason, and my dark card happens to be the Three of Swords. So on the Three of Swords in the Light Seer's deck, it's a girl with like arrows piercing her heart from all directions, and she is on her knees and she is screaming out for something. Because, and even just talking about that energy, like I almost get emotional, because Like, that is so much where I've been these last 50 hours. I know I laughed through it to try to, like, like, get it back in there, but um, the keywords for the Three of Swords are painful separation, loss, heartbreak, an opportunity to heal, shadows coming to light, and finding inspiration again. And yeah, this severing, although painful, is a necessary part of the process. Despite all proof to the contrary, your brightly lit future will arrive because of this experience. Tie yourself to your light and prepare to spend some time nurturing your tender spirit. These shadowy times are always opportunities to become stronger and more resilient, so give yourself time to heal and know that you will love, thrive, and find inspiration again soon. Like, that card was, I pulled that about 6 hours into watching Handmaid's Tale on the first day. And that, like, really, really did something to kind of, like, let me settle into how miserable I was. Like, this is definitely processing something. Like, I was talking to Dolly this morning, and a memory surfaced around all of this that when I was younger, my dad, a couple of times, I'm the oldest and I have 3 younger brothers that are basically my age. And he would use the term women's work and men's work. And I can remember being like 6 years old and just like fucking vengeful that he would like try to categorize like women and men as like they're 2 separate capabilities, like they're 2 separate things. And so that's something that like I feel like I've been manifesting, obviously, this thread of energy for a really long time. And then seeing the news this week, like, it set off this, I think maybe a better way for me to think about it is like it brought something up from the depths that has been there, like, literally since I was a child. And my dad tried to tell me that my brothers couldn't do dishes because that's women's work. And I just like was like, no, no, at 6 years old, and no, this week at however old I am now, I don't remember. But this week has been a huge opportunity for healing, and sometimes like plunging head first into your worst case scenario of like in my mind, when I think a lot about the things that I'm grateful for and what I appreciate about my life. And I've deliberately practiced my mindset into that direction for years now. And so I spend like a lot of time every day. And it was mind-blowing to me how infrequently I am going into detail about the freedoms that I have and how much of those freedoms I literally take for granted every single day. And it's things like I own this house. I didn't have to have a man co-sign for me to get a loan to buy this house. I own businesses. Like, I have rights in this world to do anything that I want to do. Like, I have total freedom. And when I'm thinking about things about my life that I'm grateful for, often I write this house. Often I write lots of things, but never do I get down into the depth of like even recognizing that it is like literally a positive manifestation to even have the freedom to do that in the first place. That like there are still countries on this planet right now today where women are without the rights that like we here in America were outraged that they would even consider taking them away from us. Like, I'm gonna have to like sit here for a second and like read some chat. You guys are saying some things. That's good. So you asked how we've been. I've been 3 of Swords mood of feeling like I can't take any more swords. However, I also realize that I'm the one putting them in there, and that is my problem. Truth, right? Like that's a big point, and that's actually like feeding into what we're going to talk about with Mercury retrograde today and how our perception plays such a critical role in what happens. Like, I was watching a Dr. K video this morning. I feel like a lot of my stories sound like that. It's like starting your sentences with, well, my therapist says. I don't have a therapist at the moment, but Dr. K, he's pretty close. So he was talking this morning about how like if you're sensitive to rejection. And the person was like, any small sign of rejection, and I feel awful. I just feel miserable and in so much pain because this person like maybe is going to reject me. And he talked about how like, okay, so there's this signal, and then there's the trigger, and then there's the reaction or the feeling or the behavior or whatever. And so often we're like, I don't want to be sensitive to rejection. I need a thicker skin, or like whatever we tell ourselves. And he's like, that's kind of coming at it from like, I don't want to feel what I feel. Like, I don't want to be triggered by this thing. And I don't want to act like this, or I don't want to have that behavior in my life. And he's like, back it up to the signal in the first place, like that first sign of rejection that you're mentioning. It's like right then and there, you did the perception. Like, what actually happened? Like, that person didn't text you back for 2 hours. Like, they didn't reject you. They have a life. So, like, the way you perceive something is actually what triggers you. So, like, that is not lost on me. Okay. So, like, I fully, this is kind of where I'm coming like full circle with this week is like, again, I am more in touch with my freedom than I maybe ever have been. And like, I wouldn't necessarily call myself like a patriot. That sounds weird. I've never really considered that. But like, I find myself more dedicated to personal freedom right now today than I've ever been in my entire life, and more willing to do what I'm doing right now, where, like I said at the beginning, I've never really gotten political on this channel. And again, I don't think this is political, but people want to call it political. But like, it's like, I get to say what I think. I get to say what's true for me. I get to say when something like breaks my heart. And this week's news, like, that's the most heartbroken I've been in a long time. And it's weird to say, watching The Handmaid's Tale soothed me. Like, it made me feel better to look it in the face and see, like, what is the worst possible scenario? And can you look that devil in the face? And if I can, then yes, my path may be hard. Yes, they may take things away from me that I feel like I can't live without, but nobody can take away my connection with me and me, aka my connection with source energy. Like, that's coming, that's happening inside of me. And my freedom is more clear to me as like an internal structure than ever before. Like, okay, they take away this freedom and then they take away another freedom. Like, I'm in a same-sex relationship right now. And like, that's definitely like down the slippery slope of like, first we lose this and then this and then like, that's on the line of things that, this same group of people wished weren't allowed. And again, I come back into, I've always been a big proponent of my own personal freedom and not allowing basically anybody to ever like come between me and my freedom. But I've never like spoken out about like what I believe. I tend to keep it inside myself. Like, you know, nobody can take away my freedom, and that's all that really matters. But like, then I show up to this as a scheduled event, and I'm like, all I can think about right now is personal freedom, and how like right now, the people who have an issue, like, I don't want to get too far into like what it is, but like, in a world of freedom where like freedom is basic, and that I feel like is a lot what we have in the US. Like, it's not perfect. There's definitely things that, marginalized communities that are fighting for more rights. But like, overall, when you look around at like some of the other places, like, we have basic freedom. And with that, we have it to lose. And I don't think I ever really thought about it like that as much as I have this week. And at the same time, like, going back to, I put those swords in there, like, this is my perception, like, we create our own reality, and what we allow our attention to get sucked into and what we allow ourselves to be convinced of is up to us. And sometimes we're more aware that it's happening, and sometimes it just kind of happens and we don't really realize that we let it happen. But like, even this is where I feel like kind of toxic positivity it just doesn't work. Like flat out, like falls flat on its face, because like for the last 50 hours I've sat in misery and terror and anger, more like rage probably. I've cried and cried and cried, and I still like am just like over and over and over again about it, because like it's hard to see the positive in what's going on right now. Really hard. Like you'd be tempted to call it impossible, but I know from practicing for years that's not. Like there's positive in everything. Nothing is all positive or all negative. Like there's duality in everything, light and dark. And so like I've been really reaching for like what is the positive here? And what I'm coming up with is this fire in my belly is the positive. Like this willingness to use my voice, open my voice and say what I believe. Like maybe that helps give other people inspiration or motivation or whatever to like use their voices too. Because I think that's like, you know, while we may be at risk of losing some of our freedoms in this country in the near future, we haven't lost them yet. And right now, today, like in this reality that we've created, we still have them. Like I still have this freedom, and I'm going to use it and I'm going to savor it, and I'm not going to take it for granted one single day ever again in my life. I hope. I'm hoping that that lasts. To really ground into like a whole nother level of how good my life is right now today. And that's like right now is all we ever have. So I think there's very much a totally different path that's available than just like, I'm mad and I'm gonna wallow in it, versus like, I'm gonna feel this. I'm gonna feel this rage. I'm gonna feel this loss. I'm gonna feel this heartbreak, and I'm gonna let it move me. I'm gonna let it put a fire in my belly so that I'm not quiet, so that I'm not gonna just like sit back and watch this happen. I don't have any answers yet on like, well, you know, I'm not exactly on the Supreme Court. So what am I supposed to do about it? I'm a little at a loss. And that's where the unknown piece comes in. Like there is so much of this that requires us to have faith that like we truly are creating our reality. And the more we're afraid that they're going to rip something away from us that we can't lose, the more we're just like kind of giving energy and creating that particular reality to happen to us, versus grounding into our freedoms and exercising them to the fullest extent of like what we're capable of right now today. And that includes me having this amazing channel on this amazing platform called YouTube, and where I don't have any sponsors. I don't have anybody to answer to. Like I get to feel what I feel and I get to give words to it. And in my life, like I've been thinking like, what are the freedoms that if I lost them, I would be truly devastated? And I think freedom of speech is one, and the freedom to write is another, the freedom to read and educate myself. Like if I lost those, I would be I would fight with my life to get them back for myself and everybody else who lost those freedoms. And so it's like that inspiration is allowed to be a good thing, even in a sea of darkness. Like I'm basically clinging to this right now of like, I get to savor my freedom. I get to use it and exercise it to its fullest while I still can. And that gets to be the upside, you know, like this devastating event can actually be inspirational. And that's all in how you look at it. So, yeah. Hi from Panama City, Florida. Hello. I have been having my own tidal wave of emotions, have my personal social identity from an ex. How dare your intro others to an image I didn't agree to. I don't know what that means. Yes, that's where I'm at now. It's all distraction. Who is that wants to tell me I'm not free? It's not just to suck me down from my perch on the second branch. Good morning, everyone. So that, yeah, it's like, again, freedom is another one. Like, how do you even define that? How do you even, like, what even is freedom? Is it something that someone else gives you, or is it something that you claim from inside? So these are questions. I don't have the answers. I am in a sea of hurt, basically, and trying to get what I can out of it because this is where I am. And yeah, that's good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. I am going to go grab my notes to cover Mercury and Gemini. So that is just going to take me a second. They're right over there and I'll be right back. I got my notes. I almost started going without my little mic guy back on. Thank you for waiting for me. That's very generous of you. I think I understand what that person was saying about like, how dare you intro others to an image I didn't agree to? Kind of like a lack of a trigger warning on this whole video. And I get that. I really do. Yeah. But at the same time, like there is inside that Aries energy, like where we had Venus enter Aries and we're having Jupiter enter Aries like here pretty soon, like there is so much value to letting your truth, your primal fire flow however it's going to flow. And yes, the shadow side of Aries is that you burn people who didn't sign up to get burned. And of course, especially a self-aware Aries is going to feel some kind of way about burning people. You're not going to just burn them on purpose. But at the top of Aries' priority list is honoring yourself and what you're feeling. And there was something undeniable about stepping forward in this authenticity, this emotion that is alive and present in every cell of my being at this point. So representing that energy is how I've honored myself today. And the beautiful thing about Aries, and this is I have Aries intercepted in my chart in the 12th house. So finding my self-assertive side has taken me literally my whole life up until this point. And right now, how I'm feeling about it is like I've always felt guilty about asserting myself because I feel like maybe I'm dominating other people. And at this point, I'm asserting myself because I can't not, because I can feel my soul and my soul is animating my being. Like when we think about Aries and raw primal fire, that's what it means, is that you're not standing in between your soul and what your soul wants. Like you're not trying to talk yourself out of it. You're not trying to say why it's inappropriate that you're doing this. And letting yourself have access to pure self-expression, I gotta think is like one of the highest frequencies of Aries energy. So as someone who is a recovering people pleaser, I do apologize about if there was anything up until this point that was unnecessarily uncomfortable for you, but also I don't apologize for sharing what's real for me, you know? Like we have the freedom to do that. And there's something like so primal to cherish inside of that freedom, and to like again go back to, is freedom something that somebody gives you or is it something that you claim? And today, for maybe one of like my most successful times, like I feel like I have stepped into my Aries energy and claimed that freedom, that like I'm alive and I inherently get to feel what I feel. I get to express myself in whatever way feels genuine in that moment. And if we weren't supposed to do that, we wouldn't have Aries energy, you know? Like if we weren't supposed to do that, things like the news this week wouldn't put fires in our belly. They wouldn't animate us into acting in ways that we probably wouldn't normally act if we were less motivated and feeling a little bit more inclined towards like the opposite Libra side of like keeping the peace and keeping people happy and comfortable. And that's not where I'm at today. That's not where I've been for the last 50 hours. I'm feeling my fire and I'm leaning into it. It's the season. Jupiter is about to come into Aries here in just a few days now, and fire is only going to get hotter. The desire and the ability to feel and express your fire is only going to get hotter. And yeah, this is just the beginning. So I think it's very interesting that like that leak is talking about a decision that's not going to come until the fall, and just from like the pure timing standpoint of like Jupiter is going to be in Aries from May to October. So like while Jupiter is in Aries, while this whole thing is while this whole thing is unfolding, Jupiter is in Aries, and our ability to feel our fire and express our fire is more than it normally is. And I don't think that that's by accident. Like this feels like divine timing. The fact that we even had this opportunity, that the leak even happened, and we can let it put a fire in our bellies and do what we feel we need to do about that. Like when you have that energy rush into your grid, what else are you going to do? Denying it does nothing. It just shoves it down and later leads to an explosion, is my general experience. Again, I have Aries like intercepted in the 12th house. So like I avoid conflict and confrontation at all costs, but almost inevitably there will be an explosion at some point, which will hurt other people. So yeah, it's like a work in progress for me to try to communicate when I'm in all of this emotion, because it is intense and it is easy to get on a soapbox and tell the world what it should be. But there is like maybe my heavy Sagittarius energy that I'm like practicing just saying what's true for me in any moment. I don't need anybody else to do anything. I don't need anybody else to feel any kind of way about anything. I have to process what I'm feeling, what's in my grid at this point. Otherwise, it backs up on me and the results are not good. Yeah. Oh, Untreated Soul? Is that the name of the book? Untethered Soul is one by Michael Singer that comes up in the chat on this all the time, so much so that I had to buy it and listen to it, and it is fabulous. That ability to like observe yourself, and like meditation basically is like kind of practicing that as far as like becoming the observer of your own inner workings. I in my own like kind of coming to this and like practicing my emotional guidance system, I call it being on the observation deck. Like all of this water that's down here happening, all that emotion, but you're up here on this observation deck where you're looking down at it and you're just seeing like, ooh, that's a big wave over there. That's this. Ooh, that's carrying all these thoughts. None of those feel good. It's like just observing and being detached and taking it all in for what it is. And that's why like when the energy hit me on Wednesday morning and all I could do was lay in my bed and cry and watch Handmaid's Tale, like I just went with it. There was no talking myself out of that. There was no like, oh, well, but I got to get this work done. No, that didn't happen. It was strong. It was powerful. It took me like all day Wednesday to even find my way to the observation deck because I was like very caught up in the primal fear of it, of like it clenched me and it held me for hours. And writing that out, I mean, not to like romanticize darkness and depression and stuff, but like it absolutely made me stronger. Absolutely. So that is, ooh, nice. Thank you, Maddie. From our blog, What is My Fear Saying? Head to the observation deck to find out. That's a blog post that has a podcast episode in it. So yeah, all of this is really helpful, I think, too, that we have Mercury retrograde about to start. And that is helpful, challenging, like how, again, it comes back to like, how do you want to look at it? Because the fact that we are having the dust stirred up in this moment, and then just, I think it's about the same day that Jupiter enters Aries, May 10th and 11th, Mercury retrograde starts, and we're already in the shadow of Mercury retrograde. We're going to get into all of this, what all of that means and the dates and everything. But basically, it's just like like you already, bumped your elbow and it's sore and it hurts. And then somebody comes along and they just like knock into the exact spot where it hurts. And it just sends radiating pain out through your being. And in that moment, Mercury retrograde style, it's so easy to like be mad at them, to get mad at the other person who bumped the wound that you were already carrying. But kind of going back to the Three of Swords, like we're the ones that, I mean, if you want to believe that we put the swords in there to begin with, which I kind of, through a karmic kind of context, I do tend to lean kind of into that, that like, this is all just between me and me. Like, it's really not got anything to do with the other person. They're just a mirror that's helping me work through whatever I'm working through. But we are also probably more important than who put the swords in there. It's like, you are the only person who has the ability to take them out. So leaving them in there is up to us, or taking them out is up to us. And Mercury retrograde, it's like bumping every sword that you left jabbed into your heart. And whose fault is that? Like it's Mercury retrograde, like it just kind of turns up the volume on the agitation level on the planet. Everybody's really confronted with their own resistance, their own limiting patterns. And most of us are real touchy about all of those things. And so to have all of it kind of come in and confront us all at once, like it's a jarring experience. And it puts everybody in a slightly worse mood. We're a little bit off balance. We're distracted by our own shit. And now there's miscommunications happening with other people. And it's setting us up for like those kinds of miscommunications to end up being something like the straw that broke the camel's back. And again, you're in a situation then where it's so easy to point the finger at the other person and be like, they shouldn't have, of course we said noon. How did they understand that it was 11? Like, what the hell happened here? Like, they weren't even listening to me and you're so mad at them. I mean, typically in Mercury retrograde, the things that happen, they're honest mistakes. But it's like those little bumps in the road like feel 10 times bigger at this point, because every single bump has this magical way of like hitting one of your unique triggers, like one of your unique buttons. Those are the types of bumps in the road that you're manifesting. So it's yeah, iceberg. Yes. Oh my gosh, like saying iceberg straight ahead. Yes, exactly. Like we can see it. It's necessary death. It's a necessary like release and reevaluation. Like when we get into the retrograde words, like no matter which planet it is, it's all the words: reassess, review, reflect, recalculate, reallocate. Like we're going back and we're gonna see about, was that as good as it could be? Like, was there some stuff in there that maybe we could let go of? And, is this really working for us? And taking our own accountability as far as like, we're half of any situation that we're ever a part of. So if we find ourselves in a moment that is particularly bad for us, then the retrograde period lets us look into our own patterns and see how have I been making choices in my life that has brought me to this point. And again, depending on where you are in your ability to do shadow work and to sit with your own shadow, to like have that reflected to you, it can be a very reactive time, just because there's a lot of people on the planet who aren't practicing it that way. They're reacting to, other people doing bad things to them, or technology like not cooperating with them. Technology is a funny one that glitches during Mercury retrograde. Actually, this morning while I was getting in the shower and I was trying to start my music to like get me pumped up. That's like my pattern. That's what I always do. And so I start the music and I head for the shower and it like cuts out. And I get in the shower because I didn't notice. And then all of a sudden I'm like, wait, my music isn't playing. And then I'm wet and I get back out of the shower to like restart the music. And it starts playing and then immediately cuts off. And it like closes out of Spotify altogether. And I open it one more time and it does it again. And at that point, this is kind of like the Mercury retrograde situation. At that point, I was getting really frustrated that like, you're not giving me my music. Like, why are you doing this to me? And then all of a sudden I was like, oh, not meant to be. And I got in the shower and I had a quiet shower. And then it was quiet afterwards. And then like, it was like the quiet that I needed for that time. And there's a saying with Mercury retrograde, like, give grace. Give grace mostly to yourself, but also to everybody else. Like, let that be rule number one of Mercury retrograde. Give grace. Not because you're letting other people off the hook for like, oh, they showed up late and they're disrespecting my time, but because like giving them grace and being understanding, or giving yourself grace and being understanding of your own moments, that makes your life easier. And Mercury retrograde, especially, I got to think the second half, where the first half of Mercury retrograde is going to be through Gemini, and then it'll go back into Taurus. And so the last 11 days or something is in Taurus, and then it'll station direct in Taurus and go back forward. It'll re-enter Gemini and then carry on through Gemini into Cancer. And I gotta think that especially those last 11 days when Mercury is retrograde in Taurus, that this is going to be a bit of a bumpy ride as far as being confronted with all the little ways that we are basically like not necessarily in a rut with like all the negative connotations that that includes, but like we're in a particular pattern, for better or for worse. And basically Mercury retrograde, especially in Taurus, will be pointing out how that pattern is really not working for us anymore. And the more bumps in the road that we're experiencing, it's like, yeah, that's like the farther your pattern is away from like who you're meant to be, who like how your energy naturally works, like honoring yourself and what your emotions are telling you, letting your true authentic self guide you. If you're doing that on the regular, Mercury retrograde, it's going to give you little moments where, yeah, the music doesn't play, but it's like, oh, it must be meant to be. I must be meant to be in silence. Or, oh, you thought it was 11 and I thought it was noon. How funny. Okay, well, let's reschedule. And we'll just have to pick a different day. There must be something going to unfold that like we have got to pick a different day and let the timing sort itself out. It's just not meant to be today. You know, like there's all kinds of ways where you can take those bumps and be your own shock absorber through the way that you're perceiving it. Like if you're, okay, I saw this on some other pages poll recently where this guy's polls get like 15 to 20,000 responses, which I think is just incredible from like a data nerd perspective. That's like enough of a sample size to be statistically significant, FYI. And he asked a question about like, I usually get what I want, I think is how it said it. And then it basically was like true and false. And I'm like, true. I almost always get what I want, like nearly exclusively, I think. And I'm just kind of noticing that that's true about my life. And so I clicked true. And it was something like 30% had said true and 70% had said false. I usually don't get what I want. And that's a problem. That's a big problem, in my opinion. And that is a recipe for hitting a retrograde period, or especially Mercury retrograde, where shit is going to malfunction. Because if you're used to settling for what's not working for you, expect it to just get more uncomfortable during the Mercury retrograde. And basically, more uncomfortable equates to less tolerable. And so that's where we see people's reactions becoming more extreme. And I know there's like some stuff out there as far as like, you know, basically avoid certain situations, like don't go on a first date during Mercury retrograde, or like don't sign a contract during Mercury retrograde. And there's people out there that will give you that advice, and that's fine if that resonates. But like for me, it's like, it's not a matter of like disengaging from the world and like putting your life on pause for 3 weeks. It's an opportunity to, again, be on the observation deck, or like the Untethered Soul puts it, like be your observer and watch your own reactions to what you're manifesting in your life and the patterns and how they're playing out, and see, because that negative emotion, in Dr. K's video this morning, he said like negative emotion is a huge influence on our behavior. So when we feel bad, it motivates us to change our behavior. So if Mercury retrograde is especially painful and difficult, there are likely nuggets in there that can help evolve your choices and your behavior going forward, if you'll let it. If you can take it in and observe that, like, wow, that really set me off. why would that set me off like that? That's really interesting. Oh, it reminds me of when my boss said that to me. Yep. Oh, and that reminds me of when my dad said that to me when I was little. Dang it. Retrograde, it sets us up to be able to connect those dots if you'll turn inward and even explore that there are dots to connect. So that's kind of like a high level overview that if you took that, and I mean, that's basically like my advice for Mercury retrograde is give grace mostly to yourself, but also to everybody else, and be the observer. Maybe it's a good time to reread The Untethered Soul. Maybe that's a note to me, because it is such a time of like being aware of our own patterning and whether or not it's working for us. And again, Taurus Mercury especially is deep in its patterning. And that part of retrograde could get especially bumpy. But if you know this going in, if you know that like, oh, there's a bump, time to get on the observation deck. Like if you can look at it with that kind of perspective, I feel like retrograde holds immense capacity to basically like reorient and point ourselves in a direction that's actually going to work for us. Like, you know, Gemini kind of likes change just for the sake of change, where Taurus likes sameness just for the sake of sameness. So I'm really interested to see how like the first half of retrograde plays out while it's in Gemini, and then the second half plays out while it's in Taurus. Maybe we talk about it more at the end and kind of see how everybody's experience was. But yeah, I would imagine the speed bumps are going to be a little bit easier to take in the first half and a little bit more challenging to take in the back half. But that's all the more reason to start practicing now and see what we can see. And hopefully the first half of retrograde, we've illuminated enough of our patterns that we're already aware of like, and then we hit a speed bump in the Taurus part and we're like, oh, yep, there's the big old reaction, because now we're into the fixed earth sign energy of like not really caring for change whatsoever. So here's the big reaction, but I already know that's a work in progress. I already know I'm working on that. So it's all good. Like yeah, this upsets me and I need to go and get in my journal and I need to work that energy out. Maybe I need a good cry, but like, I'm not mad about it. It's a work in progress. I'm headed in the right direction. So yeah, it's going to be a fun time, I think. Can't get this on there. There we go. So basically, it's a tower moment, and we are at the beginning where we are like, oh God, flames, distraction, blah, blah, negative. It looks awful, but in reality, it opens the way for the new and better. Beautifully said. Legit. And the Crooked Trail says, yep, feels something like that. Oh, perfect. Thank you so much. So yeah, it's a turbulent time, but it's also like a reflective time. It's a time where we can learn more about ourselves if we let it go down like that. So that's my invitation, is see if we can let it go down like that. Like see how smooth we can allow it to be. Because like the experience I had this morning, like I could have gotten in the shower and been like, God, why the fuck does my music not work? Like I do that every time, and now my energy's not going to be right because I didn't get to listen to my music. And oh God, like like that was me way back when, was like rail against what's not working, get mad at the person who's late, be upset that I missed my flight. Like that was how I rolled, was like when things didn't go exactly according to my plan, I freaked out. I had a really negative response. And now it's like I've practiced going with the flow to the point of times like Mercury retrograde can be extremely illuminating in terms of what shadow, like where are you at in your shadow work, basically, like how good are your emotional coping skills? Because, you know, the Karen, who's, no offense on the term, but like the person who is yelling at the store clerk because they're out of banana bread or whatever, like that person is getting a status update on their shadow work, and they're disempowered, and that's why they're yelling. So like their shadow work is that they feel disempowered and they're trying to get their power back in whatever way that they can. And if your moments are like like, that's really irritating. And oh gosh, I need to like take a minute and see if I can find a silver lining on this. Like, if that's the extent of the extremity of your reactions, like, that's a pretty good sign on your emotional coping skills. You know, the fact that you're able to even see, like, let me see if I can zoom out and get some clarity. Let me see if I can journal this out for a page or two and see if I can unravel it, maybe, you know, like, even just the fact that you have that pause and that awareness, like, that's powerful. So expect a reflection, expect an update on where you are with your shadow work and your emotional coping skills. And if you're expecting it, then it's not really surprising when it happens. Like, it's going to happen. That's the part that, you know, it's kind of unavoidable 3 or 4 times a year, but it's not for nothing. Like, I was listening to something the other day where they were talking about Mercury retrograde. It's actually on the prep playlist for today. It's like a 2.5 hour video all about Mercury retrograde. And they're like, this is part of it. Like, this is just part of how Mercury operates, is that, you know, Mercury represents our thoughts. It moves super fast and it goes retrograde 3 to 4 times a year. So that while we've been thinking so fast, we also have these built-in periods of like, okay, let me pause and let me look back at how I've been thinking these last few months. And do I like everything that has come out of, you know, my natural, like, going so fast, 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 fast? Or is this now getting me into situations that are creating negative outcomes for me? And maybe I need to take stock of what choices am I making? What thoughts am I thinking? And how are they unfolding? And if we don't become aware, like, if you put your hand on the hot stove and you don't register pain, you melt your freaking hand off. Like, of course you want to register pain. So the Mercury retrograde period is like the pain response of anything that you're doing that's not working for you, you know? Yeah, Mercury retrograde video. Thank you. So, the dates on Mercury retrograde. So overall, it's May 10th through June 2nd. But like we said, it's in Gemini for the first bit, May 10th through the 22nd. And then I think on the 22nd or the 23rd. I don't have it written down. It enters Taurus and then is still retrograde until June 2nd, at which time it'll station direct at 26 degrees of Taurus. And then it moves back over the end of Taurus and then re-enters Gemini for a second time. So that is where we'll start as far as like some thoughts around Mercury in general. And this comes off of the Mercury deep dive video that's on the Astrology podcast. Thank you so much, Maddie. Enters Taurus on May 22nd. They have a Mercury deep dive video that's like 2.5 hours long, all about Mercury as a planet. It is the ruler of Gemini and Virgo. It stays in a sign between 15 and 67 days. So at its fastest, when it's full speed ahead, it covers 2 degrees per day. This is why we need frequent retrogrades, because you miss a lot of stuff. And so when it retrogrades, then it turns around and recovers, it sounds like about 8 degrees, because it goes all the way to Gemini 4 and then it goes back to Taurus 26. And so the retrograde is about 8 degrees long, it seems. And so, yeah, if it's having its retrograde all in one sign, like what it's going to do in Capricorn later this year into next year, it's in there for 67 days. So these periods of retrograde, like the more you look at how they fall and the signs and the timing, they are so purposeful. Also skip that. Okay. So Mercury, I did not realize this, but it is so neutral that it is basically not a masculine or a feminine planet, that it really does depend on what sign it's in, what aspects it's making. It basically adopts the coloring of whatever else it has going on around it. And that Mercury itself rules the process of translation. This was a really interesting idea because it takes you a long ways on lots of different things of like translation. I naturally think of like, okay, so like English to Spanish or whatever, but translation in the sense of, in order to even say things out loud, you have to translate your thoughts and your inner knowing into words. And there's another really good Dr. K video that's called something like Why I Can't Speak Out Loud the Way I Do in My Head, or something like that, where basically he's talking about this translation process that happens between your mind and your voice. And your thoughts are essentially existing inside your imagination. And to get them to be words, they have to go through the linguistic cortex. And that's what translates them into something that you can say out loud. And from my experience, emotions can basically shut down that linguistic cortex, where, like, when I'm really mad, I have a really hard time saying anything. And when I'm like any kind of intense emotion, like, it gets really, really difficult. And when I had really bad social anxiety, like through high school and my 20s, it also anxiety, that fear, it would also shut it down to where somebody would ask me like, how are you? And I'm like, I'm Carly. What's your name? Like, I mean, it just was like that, like where I can't pay attention to them. I am stumbling all over my words. So strong emotion plays such a critical role in how your linguistic cortex is functioning. And if you're deeply insecure about what you sound like, again, that insecurity, that fear, it's just like collapsing your linguistic cortex. It's like shutting down your ability to put anything out because you're so afraid of what the reaction's going to be. So that process of translation between thoughts and speech, the translation between the planets and how they are in the sky and how they move and their patterns and cycles, and divination. So like this translation process of even talking about like here's Mercury retrograde, we can see it in the sky, and then we're going to translate that into what does it actually mean for you. So Mercury is all up in that process, obviously. And then also I thought it was really interesting that like translation tends to be what I'm really good at. Like I had a job back at the software company that was my first experience of like really finding a role where I felt like I was shining and my superpowers were coming out, and like I was seeing strengths in myself that I didn't even know I had. And that entire role was the go-between person between our business teams and their clients, like our business clients, and the developers, and like the guys who actually built the software that would serve the business clients. So I would go to meetings with the business clients and I would understand, okay, here's what I need to know. I need this metric. So that means I need this report, which means I need this data, which means I need this questionnaire, which means I need this verification. So like all of that back behind happened with the developers, versus like the business guy is just like, here's my metric. This is what I need to know out of your system. And so I would take his metric and then go translate it into how are the developers actually going to build that. And so Mercury, that process of taking things apart and putting it back together, and then you like kind of to jump ahead a little bit, like Mercury retrograde then is like taking apart your patterns and putting them back together in a way that this is better than what you had before. If you can stomach a few bumps along your road, you will end up in a better spot. Mercury also covers data retention, and our listening skills. Like so often, pretty sure this wasn't a Dr. K video. I'm just like all up in recommending him today, apparently. That's most days, but he did a video about like poor memory, and that's something that I've definitely thought about myself, like my memory sucks, and he's like, usually memory is fine and the issue is listening. Like if you don't hear the person and what they said, if you don't absorb what they said, then you can't remember it. And it's not that you like heard them, took in the information and then forgot all about it. It's more that you were in your own head thinking your own thoughts, and you were like playing along like, yep, sounds good. Okay, well, we'll see you later. Like you could have that conversation regardless of what the other person is saying. So it's like our listening skills are covered by our own unique Mercury. But when Mercury goes retrograde, basically like the retrograde on the planet turns that energy inward. And so it turns up our ability to listen to ourselves, which automatically by default turns down our ability to listen to other people. So again, that's where Mercury retrograde can cause miscommunications, not because this person isn't listening to you because they disrespect you. They're wrapped up in their own shit, the same as you're wrapped up in your own shit. And if you can get each other to hear you, then that's a miracle. And so it's like, again, don't schedule, like, it's not like don't schedule things or avoid signing contracts or all of that. It's like pay special attention, triple check, double confirm, write it down where you can both see it and clarify and, double check the day before, like, hey, I wrote this down for 10 a.m. my time zone. I believe that's 11 a.m. your time zone. Does that still work for you? Like those are the kinds of honest mistakes that can happen and then get us riled up or not, depending on, again, where we're at with our shadow work. Mercury is also our perception. So this is kind of where we started as far as like the way we are triggered in this world. Like it's not random and it's not happening to us. We are perceiving an event in our experience that is causing us to feel a certain way. The trigger is in response to the perception, not in response to the event itself. So again, the Mercury sign tells you in the natal chart, like in your personal natal chart, it tells you about like how is your perception naturally focused. So if you have Mercury in a water sign, for example, you are very much attuned to how what you say makes other people feel. Like you are just naturally more like paying attention to the emotional vibe of the space. And from there, it's like, you know, kind of a classic, like, which is more important, kindness or truthfulness? And with a water Mercury, usually you get people opting on the side of kindness versus fire Mercury, you would have people opting on the side of truthfulness. So that's kind of like where everybody's communication style is like 100% unique, because we're all guided to pay attention in different ways. Like the fire Mercury person isn't feeling the emotions of everybody around them the same as the water Mercury. So it's not like they have the same experience and they're just disregarding everybody else's feelings. They legit aren't having that experience. They are much more in the passion of their own thoughts and their own opinions and their own perspective of the world, fire Mercury. So I think it's helpful for understanding, like, when there are miscommunications, that there are so many reasons why honest miscommunications like happen naturally all the time without any malice on either person's part. And the willingness to communicate and clarify and double check and, not in a way of like, I don't trust you to show up on time, so I'm going to shove 3 reminders down your throat, but like, tossing it out there like, hey, it is Mercury retrograde. So I thought I'd double check. This is what I have on my calendar. Let me know if that's what you wrote down on yours, and, we'll go from there. So I think that that is good spirited and helpful and generous to give someone the grace of saying, like, let's preempt a miscommunication and let's communicate in advance, maybe more thoroughly than we normally would. But like, is that a problem? I don't know. I don't think so. But we'll see. We'll see how it plays out. I feel like as I go through like studying astrology, it's only been like not even 2 years. So living through the cycles themselves are so much like an experiment of like, okay, so here's what I've studied and here's what I understand about this, and now I'm going to watch it play out. And that was like Venus and Aries, getting to talk about that last week, and then Monday it moving in there, like I'm living it now, the actual energy of it. And we learn so much more through the feeling of like how we perceive that energy than what we can learn out of a book. That's for sure. Mercury represents the wiring of your brain. And that's, again, another reason why when it goes retrograde, it can feel like you have brain fog or you're not as sharp as you usually are or whatever. And again, depending on how much grace and compassion you're used to giving to yourself, that can either be like, oh, well, it's Mercury retrograde, like whatever, I'm just going to go with the flow, double check my work real close just in case I made a mistake. Or you beat the shit out of yourself because you messed it up again and you're mad at yourself for being imperfect. Again, I'm talking about who I used to be. It's neutral. We talked about that. It takes on the characteristics of the signs and the aspects and all of that. So that's why I'm personally really curious about how the first half in Gemini is going to play out compared to the second half in Taurus. And because it represents taking things apart and putting them back together, it also talks about systems, components, technique, technology, tools of all kinds, like anything that is involved in that process of creating a system to get from point A to point B. Basically, systems themselves are just a big pile of pieces and components. And Mercury is about taking the pieces apart and putting them back together in a better way. So when Mercury goes retrograde, basically we can expect to witness failures within our systems that we personally are responsible for improving. Then, like, if it failed, that's just pointing out a weakness or a flaw, and it's up to us to like correct that and maybe avoid that in the future. Mercury also rules therapy because, like, most of us don't just talk to talk. Most of us talk because we want whatever it is to be heard. That, like, talking is one thing, but being listened to is like a whole nother level of soothing and reassuring. So that's again where it can be really triggering when you have miscommunications with people because you feel like they're not listening to you. And a lot of times we can take that really personally when it's probably not. It's just, them being preoccupied with their own stuff. So when Mercury goes retrograde, like I said, that's 3 to 4 times a year. It varies because the Mercury can only get 28 degrees from the sun. So it's either going to be in the same sign with the sun or the sign behind or the sign in front. And when it moves backwards, it's like the planet isn't actually moving backwards around the sun. It appears to be moving backwards because of its relationship with the earth. So the difference is the same. In as far as astrology goes, we do classify the pattern as moving backwards and covering degree points that it had already covered just right before that. And that's actually how the shadow period of Mercury retrograde is calculated. I didn't maybe I knew this. I don't know. I think I thought that it was like 10 days before and 10 days after, that it was like a standard number of days that's what the shadow was, but it's actually tied to the degree points that are going to be covered in the retrograde. So like I said, it's Mercury is going to go all the way up to Gemini 4 degrees, and then it stations direct on 4 degrees Gemini, and then it moves backwards to 26 degrees Taurus. So those degrees of 26 Taurus to 4 Gemini, those are the retrograde degrees that are going to get recovered. So from the very beginning of Mercury touching 26 Taurus, that was when we entered the shadow phase. So when it covers those degree points the first time, moving forward up to Gemini 4, that's the pre-shadow. And then it stations retrograde, it does its retrograde thing. And then when it gets back to 26 Taurus, that begins the post-shadow, because now it's going to cover those degree points for the third time, the second time going forward. So basically, like, the 2 times that it goes forward over those degrees, that's the pre-shadow and the post-shadow. So the pre-shadow was from April 26th to May 10th, and the post-shadow will be June 3rd to June 18th. So the whole thing ends up being about 6 weeks long when you factor in the shadows. And that's another piece that, like, I had heard about that, and I just like to pay attention and see, can I tell that, like, Mercury retrograde's approaching? Am I having more snafus in my day? And like this morning, like, we're not into Mercury retrograde, but my music like would not play. So there's definitely shadow elements, and then it's supposedly supposed to just kind of turn the volume up on how the resistance is coming into your experience once the retrograde actually hits and we're out of the shadow. Technical snafus, delays, breakdowns of communication. Do you guys have anything else that like comes to mind when you think of Mercury retrograde? I think of like time zone miscalculations and technical difficulties, like your internet going out for 3 days and having to miss a bunch of meetings that you had scheduled or something, just because, like, in the divine scheme of things, like, those meetings weren't meant to happen. Um, yeah, brain fog, I think, is a big one. The last thing I want to say about Mercury retrograde, just overall, regardless of what signs it's in, I do think it's an interesting thought to consider if you were born during Mercury retrograde. So, like, in my natal chart, Mercury is retrograde. So is Venus and 4 other planets. So when those planets go retrograde, I like to feel like, basically, in a nutshell, there's almost like a level of peace there's almost like a level of ease, and like it's more comfortable when the retrograde is happening than when it's not, just because that's my energy. So when the retrograde's happening for everyone, I finally line up with everyone instead of like feeling like an alien that's like on my own planet. Um, so yeah, I do wonder, like, if you have Mercury retrograde in your own natal chart, um, do you notice that? Do you notice that, like, I have more miscommunications with people when Mercury's just doing its thing. And then when Mercury's retrograde, I feel like that's where everybody else is kind of on my level, and I notice things actually going better for me. So that's just something to kind of hold with curiosity and see if that plays out as true for you. Let me know. Keep me posted. Um, Gemini, real quick, I wanted to talk about. I'll do a brief update on Mercury retrograde headed into Taurus once we get there. But we'll start here with just like specifically about Mercury and Gemini. So Gemini, some keywords. Gemini is a masculine air sign. So it's very detached emotionally. It's very observant. Um, very much just wanting to know how things work and wanes, and take all the pieces apart, and that's interesting, and then put them all back together. Maybe you can do it better, maybe you can't, doesn't really matter. It's just for the fun, just for the curiosity's sake of like answering the question. And really, like, Gemini doesn't even want answers so much as it really just enjoys questions. Like in the book of Air, Stephen Forrest talks about unanswerable questions are really the lifeblood of Gemini. It's like, he's like, this historical event happened in 1825, and the other person's like, no, it was 1821, and you Google it and it was 1821. You're right, great, it's settled. That's not Gemini. That is Gemini is more like, which would you rather have, mortality or immortality? Which do you think would be better to live with? Another one is like, are there really angels and miracles? Which is more important, kindness or truthfulness? Like, these are questions where there is no right answer. And if somebody wants to tell you that there is, like, they're full of it, because these are things that are like allowed to be open-ended. And that's really where Gemini shines, is doesn't need to know so much as it just really likes to ponder things and talk about, like, well, if you look at it from this way, it's kind of like this, like that whole mortality versus immortality thing. Like, it's a fun one to like go back and forth and like try on the immortality argument and like see how that feels, and then try on this side and see how that feels, and that makes me want to go back over here and do that one and do this one. And it's not to answer the question, it's just for the fun of getting to think about it. The less you expect something, the more valuable the information, because shock and surprise leads to insight. So all of that is out of Stephen Forrest's Book of Air. But that, like, those light bulb moments, those happen when we're surprised by what we experienced. Like, we thought that it was going to go this way, and when it went this way, like, what? And that gets our attention. And now we are paying closer attention because we're no longer in the realm of the expected or the known. We are into the realm of surprise. And I don't know what's coming next, so I have to tune my attention even more specifically. And it's when we witness unexpected events that we have moments of insight. And so that is Gemini's lifeblood. Again, they thrive on new, surprising, unexpected things. That's why learning is like a very natural fit with Gemini energy. Like, they're kind of synonymous, but learning, I mean, in today's culture sounds a lot more like what goes on inside a school building versus like, we technically learn all day, every day, just by being alive. That's more the Gemini style learning that I'm referring to. Mercury in Gemini Gemini is also the teacher, where you think of a teacher as the person who knows the answers, but a truly good teacher doesn't give you the answer. They give you a question. They plant a seed in your mind that takes years to sprout. And through that one question, all of these different growths and plants and expressions come out of the question that they gave you, and you go on a journey of discovering your own answer. Like, that's truly a good teacher. And that's truly where Gemini shines. Again, is not giving other people their answers, but in opening your mind to maybe look at something in a different way that you hadn't looked at it like that before, asking questions that you hadn't thought of before. And now you're thinking of things that you never would have had access to if somebody hadn't asked you that unexpected question. So that's really where Gemini fits into kind of the zodiac wheel overall, is that Gemini has the biggest appetite for the unknown and the unexpected. They actually like prefer that over anything else. And I would say like more than the other zodiac signs, that there is so much like innovation and leading edge thought because of Gemini, because like there is a constant hunger where you're really not trying to find answers. You just want more questions to play with. So Mercury retrograde in Gemini and later Taurus, it's like, okay, so this phrase, the wisdom of time, I've spent some time like looping around that and thinking about like, what does that even mean? The wisdom of time. But this is where we get all the words. So Mercury moves really fast, and then naturally will go back over what it's done 3 or 4 times a year. It'll go turn backwards and like recover that ground to make sure it didn't miss anything. So it's reflecting, reassessing, reviewing, reaffirming, recalculating, revisiting the wisdom of time. Like now that we've covered that and we know what we know now we're going to go backwards and see if we can do it any better. See if we can update our process even 1 degree better than what it was before. That this can cause disturbances in the flow of info, because Mercury rules the flow of information. Learning is kind of receiving information, talking is sending information out. And the disturbance is largely like what I said about when Mercury turns retrograde, our listening ears turn inward. And that's because we're in that process of trying to see, like, is there improvements that we could make? And while we're listening to ourselves, we're better able to see and recognize and implement those changes that we think would make our process better. And it can naturally cut us off from hearing other people and what they're saying to us. So that's just something to be aware of, that like it's really interesting, like to be able to say things like, Dolly does this to me sometimes. She's got a whole stellium of personal planets in Aquarius in the 12th house. So between it being fixed energy, Aquarius, and the 12th house, which is kind of like unbound spirit of like just very, very vast. Like a lot of times she'll look right at me and be like, I didn't hear what you just said. Can you say it again, please? And I'm like, sure. Okay, here we are. It's this. And it's like her mind will naturally get wandering down its path and it's over here doing its own thing. And then she realizes I'm sitting there looking at her like with question mark face, like I just asked you something. And she's like, I didn't hear what you just said. You know, fess up, fess up to it. Give yourself grace in that moment to say, I didn't hear what you just said. Will you tell me again, please? Rather than trying to keep the peace and pretending like you heard and letting it turn into a bigger miscommunication down the road. Harder to listen to others, but easier to tune inwards. It's not about turning our lives off for a few weeks. It's about, being cognizant that this is where our attention is right now. And so anything that we're trying to do in the outside world, we just take our time a little bit more than usual. And go at our own pace, double check our work, all of that kind of stuff. And like really, like more than any of the bumps in the road or the miscommunications, the technical difficulties, like these are just things that can aggravate you. And like that's just how the world can like mirror back to you that it doesn't want to cooperate with the way you're going right now. And again, that can be a difficult message to receive. So it doesn't have to be. It can be like, oh, this is obviously not meant to be, which knowing that it's Mercury retrograde makes me wonder, is there a better way? Maybe I just get in the shower and not let there be music today. Like maybe I just go with it and see if I can find an enjoyable experience in what I can easily path of least resistance accomplish in my experience. So yeah, bottom line, give grace mostly to yourself and everybody else, not for them, yes, for them, but mostly for yourself, because it makes your life easier. I spend a lot of time talking about, usually when we're on the Taurus subject, Taurus energy, but it's like life is as easy as we let it be for ourselves, right? So, like, if we're fighting against things that aren't exactly going to plan, we're making it difficult. We're putting the swords into our three of hearts and leaving them in there versus, oh, maybe I should just go with this flow and see if that new way doesn't give me something valuable that maybe I want to take and integrate into my process overall on the regular. So, with Mercury going into retrograde here pretty soon, its retrograde is only 3 weeks long. I say only because Pluto went retrograde last week and its retrograde is 6 months long. So, for the next few weeks, once Mercury gets retrograde, we will have both of them in their retrograde, reassessing, reviewing, reflecting. So, it's not just our thought patterns, Mercury, it's also our power patterns, for lack of a better word. It's how we claim our power. Pluto is I think about it like, how much of your how much of your power have you claimed versus how much of your power still resides outside of yourself. And Pluto retrograde is basically like Mercury retrograde. It's giving you speed bumps that are letting you see where you've left your power outside of yourself so that you can take it and integrate it back in. So between our thoughts being all scrambled with retrograde and our power dynamics being scrambled with retrograde, like, and then everything that you see going on in the world right now, these are definitely going to be an interesting few weeks and really the whole rest of the year. Like, it's just really interesting to see how all of this is playing out against that backdrop of the US Pluto return, which, again, like, you would think that that's a US specific event, but because of the interconnected global economy that we live in and the US's influence around the world in so many different ways, this is basically happening to the entire world, the US Pluto return. And that's a video that I have on my channel. In that video, classic Mercury and Gemini, non-committal, flaky nonsense. I promised 3 parts to that series, and I haven't done the second 2 parts, but I do still want to. And the US Pluto return hasn't even exacted for the last time. So it's in retrograde right now. And during that retrograde, it's going to go back over the US Pluto return point, but it's not done there. It's going to keep going. And then it'll station direct. And then it's going to exact that US Pluto return point again for the 3rd time this year. So that's not until December. So we have this whole year of the US Pluto return playing out, where essentially that is having the US as a country dig back down into its initial foundation. Like, this country was built, established back in 1776. Like, that is the July 4th, 1776 is the birth chart that you use for the US. In the astrological community, that seems to be the birth chart that's used. And that, if you watch my US Pluto return video, like, the founding of the US is pretty problematic. Like, when you really get down to the fact that, like, the first 100 years we still had slavery. The first couple 100 years we still had, like, slavery or segregation of some kind. Like, women didn't even, like, get the right to have their own credit card without a man's signature until, like, 50 years ago. Like, there was a lot early on that was not good in terms of, like, this is the foundation of our country, is inequality, essentially. And now here we are in 2022 with 3 exact Pluto returning to where the US's Pluto is in its chart. And it's bringing a lot to the surface around the power dynamics that creates. When you let inequality exist at a foundational level, the systems that are built on top of that foundation reflect that. And the outcomes of those systems reflect it. And that's what we're seeing, is like the biggest wealth gap that has existed since the Great Depression, actually since the 1920s, right before the Great Depression. So it's like, you can kind of see, like, you hope that that's not where we're headed, but you can see, like, the warning signs are all there. And this year is like, that's the backdrop of the US is having a reckoning. It's having a Pluto return, which is to say, like, the old Pluto archetype is like phoenix rising from the ashes. So like the old burns to the ground so that the new can be formed from its ashes. And that's pretty scary. Like, again, we face the unknown. We don't know what it's going to look like after the old burns down. But basically, my takeaway on that whole US Pluto return thing is, like, when you really go back to the foundation, it's bad. It's rotten. It's full of inequality. And I mean, in all kinds of ways, not just racial. Um, when they say, like, all men are created equal, they wrote it and they put it on paper. And I appreciate that because it gives us something to strive for. But they absolutely didn't mean it at that point. Either that or their definition was like extremely specific to men equals, Caucasian males, and that's it. So yeah, there's actually a lot worth reconsidering here with the US Pluto return. Like, letting the old kind of crumble and give way to the new, maybe that's not so bad. Is it maybe going to be bumpy ride in the interim, in the in between of the old coming down and the new going up? Like, there's absolutely a delay in that process. Notice it's not like, the phoenix was born and then it watched its old self be burned to ashes. Like, it doesn't work like that. You got to watch the old go completely to the ground before you get even one whiff of what the new is going to be. And so there's a lot of release, which is also aided by the South Node transiting Scorpio, which started in January and will go through July of next year. There's a lot of release happening on the planet in general. And I, for one, am feeling it. I'm feeling a lot of things. And I mean, I think a lot of people would call me maybe even like Pollyanna, which, okay. But I am like bound and determined to find the silver lining and to see the good that comes out of dark things, because change is scary. And, having the old burn down and like the structure crumble, like, that sounds scary, but it's also necessary if you want to have a better outcome. If you want to have true equality, then you can't build systems on a foundation that doesn't allow for equality. Like, that just makes sense to me. But yeah, so that's kind of the backdrop of this whole time. And then, like, basically the backdrop to the backdrop is Uranus and Taurus, because that's been there since 2018 and it's not done until 2026. And again, Uranus and Taurus coincided with the Great Depression back in the 30s. And shortly after Uranus in Taurus is done, Chiron moves into Taurus, which is a whole nother chapter of that. So our world is going through some changes. We are being confronted with the shadows of our choices, and we get to decide, on a small scale, on a big scale, we get to decide what we do with those realizations of how we feel about our choices. I was listening to Brene Brown's latest book. I've mentioned it several times lately because it's so cool. It's Atlas of the Heart. And she talks about 87 different emotions and experiences that we humans go through. And specifically, the part about regret is really, really interesting, about how, like, regret feels pretty shitty, obviously, if you've ever been there, but it's an extremely productive emotion. It causes behavioral change like almost no other emotion that we experience. And so when we look at our past, when I look at our past, it's not that I feel guilty, but I do regret that those are the events of our history, right? Like, I know I personally wasn't there, but that doesn't mean that I can't be deeply sorry that those things happened. And that was a lot of what was coming out, like, not so much the last couple days, but at the beginning of this week, I was having some other release, some other tears were coming forward, and that was a lot of it. Was like, there are just so many things in the history of this country that, like, I am just so genuinely sorry that that happened. And again, it puts a fire in my belly to see that we take it and we learn from it, and we don't make the same mistakes going forward. And we don't continue to just say that, like, these problems don't exist. And that just kind of perpetuates that they're invisible and AKA unsolvable. They don't exist, so we don't need a solution. And it's like, yeah, that's one way to look at it. But all we can ever do is like, tune our own perspective of like, how do you want to look at it? What makes you feel the best and most empowered, and claiming your rights here in your life, like Aries claiming what's rightfully yours, Pluto claiming your power, finding it out in the world and putting it back inside of yourself. So these things in our world that let us experience darkness, there is light that comes out of that. I believe that down to my core. I have to, because I don't want to live in a world where it's not true. So, there's that. But it's going to be an interesting rest of the year. And I cannot believe I didn't share this right up front, but yesterday I recorded my last grocery training module. So if you've heard me talk about my grocery training contract that I've been working on the last year, I've been finishing that up the last few months, and I recorded my last bit for it yesterday. So there are some finishing touches to put on the project overall, but the heavy lifting is all done. And also, if you've heard me talk about this, then you know that that milestone means redevoting myself 100%, all of my time, 24/7. I am now free to create whatever content I want. And I had a nice long cry yesterday about like, I'm just so grateful to have this platform and to have this skill set that lets me like move energy by telling my story and putting it out there for other people who care to listen. There's just so much good stuff going on in my life that like the darkness of this week has really opened my eyes to just how good my life really is. And at that point, you're like, would you really give up the darkness? I mean, would you really go without it? How would you ever understand your own light if you didn't bump it up against the darkest backdrop possible, to see the fine edges, to see the way it moves in you? Like that black backdrop is what makes that possible. So yeah, obviously I'm not trying to romanticize just like wallowing in misery, but when it's there, when that's where you are, accepting that and finding the beauty in it, I think is a life skill that we should be teaching to the children, in my opinion. But, again, not my choice. Thank you, Maddie, for putting the US Pluto Return video. Ooh, let's see. Yes. I was born with Mercury direct, but just barely, it was stationary direct. So that is super powerful. If you have any planets that were stationed in your birth chart, meaning like the retrograde was just about to begin or it had just ended, like that planet is standing still, basically that particular planet has like an exclamation point on it in your birth chart. And so as you look at the chart as a whole, it's like not all planets are created equally. And those would be more powerful in terms of what aspects and other planets and signs and houses does that planet activate for you. And it will kind of pull the energy of the rest of your chart in that direction. So I thought that was really interesting. Since I have so many retrogrades, I went back and looked, and I think Mercury was the closest one where it was like Mercury retrograde would have been over 2 or 3 days after I was born. So it was still moving backwards. It wasn't exactly standing still, but the rest of them were kind of like all in the middle of retrograde. There was nothing stationary about it. They're moving backwards. Props to Dolly for saying that. How did she learn that? Asking for a friend. No, I mean, I feel like I've learned from her saying that to me that like I need to be more willing to say that out loud. And it really begs the question, why don't we? Right? I don't have the answers, and maybe that's okay. Like, why don't we say that out loud? Why do we feel like we're automatically disrespecting, maybe me? Why do I feel like I'm automatically disrespecting someone when my mind wandered because it found something interesting and that bloomed over here with this whole thing that I went on a whole thing, and now I look back and it's my turn to talk. Oh shit. Like, I don't know what they said. And she has really helped me to just be like, can you run that by me one more time? And that is such a beautiful, practical, like I don't know how many words, like just a few words of like giving yourself grace, right? Like I think when we pretend that we heard and we try to make something up, or, you know, like try to just like get by without having to admit that we weren't paying attention, like that's one, just delaying that pain for later, but two, like why, that's a level of self-judgment that's really interesting to scrutinize. Like why is that worth punishing yourself to the point where you're not allowed to say, you know, like, because maybe at the heart of it, it's a lot like admitting I made a mistake. And for a lot of people, saying I don't know, or I messed it up, or I should have done this and I forgot and now it's too late, like Dolly is a really interesting one because she can't, like, if she made a mistake, she's got to fess up to it. If she did something wrong, she has to confess. Like, it's like her soul just cannot house that information. And I'm laughing because this was like when she very first started at the store, she was my employee. Okay. And she was driving the forklift and she bumped the pallet, like a case of flour was like hanging off the side of the pallet, and she like was a little bit too close to the door and it like ripped open a bag of flour. And at that, it was always safe flour. Okay, these bags cost like maybe 67 cents a piece, and she ripped open two of them, and she came to me and she looked sick. She had no color in her face. She was like nervous as all get out, and she's like, I have to tell you something. And I'm like, oh my God, what? Like, what is it? You're freaking me out. And she's like, so I was unloading the freight and I ripped open a couple bags of flour. I mean, I'll clean it up and I'll pay for them, but like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to, and I'm so sorry. And like, she probably comes to it from almost the opposite end of the spectrum, is like so quick to own the mistake, is like, this is 100% my fault and I'm going to apologize for it. Maybe that's all that 12th house energy. I don't know. I've never really thought about it like that, but yeah, she's on the opposite end of the spectrum. And I feel like I've learned a lot from like her willingness to fess up, clear your conscience immediately. Like, you know, we confess our sins. I don't know. I've never been religious, but that's a thing. I think in a lot of religions is like, it unburdens you when you give voice to that. And even Brene Brown says, like, when you bring shame out into the light, it can't survive, period. So like when you confess your mistake out loud, then you're releasing energy out of your system in a really self-loving way. So yeah, that's a really interesting, props to Dolly on being able to say, like, just own it, you know, own that I definitely wasn't listening to you just now. And I think like, especially between her and I mean, there's years of rapport there that's like, I know she's not ignoring me to like piss me off. Like, I know her brain wanders. I've studied her Mercury. I know all about it. Like, she's all up in her thoughts. And so when she tells me that, I'm like, oh, and then I just repeat what it is, even though having to repeat myself is one of the things that annoys me more than anything else. When she says it like that, I just repeat what I said and give her that grace, because I understand that's how her mind is wired. That when she perceives something that like grabs her attention and runs with it, that like she can't do anything about that any more than Wednesday morning I was going to do anything besides watch Handmaid's Tale all day and cry in my bed. Like, it just is what it is. When the energy grabs you, you got to go with it. And so yeah, I think like the rapport between her and I lets that be easier, but it also like inspires me to want to practice, like, how can I bring that behavior more into myself to like more readily own that, like, hey, this is a thing that like I didn't pay attention to you, or I was supposed to do this and I forgot to do it, or like whatever it is, like to just own that and to not be so hard on yourself for like having messed it up or whatever. I don't know. Yeah. I've been saying what you're saying for years, and most people can't stand me for it. I guess I'm truth over kindness, but lies are never really kind. Still BM. Like, what sign is your Mercury? Do you know? What house is it in? I would be very interested. I'm like, Dolly, sometimes I just lose what you're saying. Yeah, I get it. Like, especially when you have like I mean, even in mine, I have a hard time listening sometimes because my Mercury Gemini will get excited because something you said reminded me of something fun and exciting and a story that I want to tell. I'm really excited about telling it. And now in my mind, I'm like excited to tell my story and thinking about how I'm going to tell my story, and I'm not listening to you anymore. And so that's like one of my own personal like spiritual evolution pieces is my heart to heart series on my channel right now, because I feel like when I show up to those sessions, I am 100% practicing my active listening. I am practicing like, okay, well, that reminded me of this cool thing that I want to say, but she's still talking. Let that go. If it comes back when it's your turn to talk, then that's what you're supposed to say. But don't be trying to like make a mental list while you're trying to like really hear what the person in front of you is saying. And there are times for you to talk. There are times for more shallow conversation where it's more back and forth and, like you more kind of hitting a tennis ball back and forth. But to like really give someone the gift of being heard, like there is such a setting aside of like your own agenda of like, I want to say this, I want to say this, I want to say this. And even sometimes like like on the second episode with Maddie, I felt kind of bad about this afterwards, Maddie, but like, it's good because here I am getting to tell this story. But it's like she was talking about the book that she had read, the Busting Loose of the Money Game, I think it was called, and the author and his take on law of attraction. And basically his take on law of attraction like triggered something inside of me, like a defensiveness almost. And I felt the need to clarify how wrong what he said was. And I really couldn't help it. It was like there was a little too much force in that part, a little bit too much like jumping into this versus like listening and honoring like what I was hearing. Like, so I mean, nobody's perfect. Like we can't expect to be perfect, but we can practice and we can notice things in other people that we admire, and we can incorporate those things into ourselves. Like Dolly's saying, like, I lost track of what you were saying. Can you tell me again? I'm really focusing this time. Like, tell me again. And there are also times where she and I have learned where like I think out loud. So I'll tell her like, all of these things, and like a grocery list is a perfect example. And she'll look at me after the second thing and she's like, you got to write it down. And I'm like, oh yeah. So like, here, let me say it out loud and I'll write it down at the same time, because I'm saying it out loud for my benefit and I'm writing it down for her benefit, because she can't listen and retain a list. Like that's just not how her brain works. So yeah, it's like giving grace and being understanding with like, how are you wired? How am I wired? Like I need to say it out loud because that's how I roll. But I totally understand that you're not catching it. Like I'm throwing it and you're over here. So like, let me write it down, and that's throwing it your way. So like being flexible, like that's cool. We need unhealthy systems to break, even if parts of us break in the midst, and we can fill the breaks with better choices. Death and rebirth both feel scary until we move through. Absolutely. Yeah. And I do believe like astrology is really powerful for my coping with all of this darkness. And like I feel like it takes my ability to do shadow work to like a whole nother level, because I'm looking at the world and I'm definitely seeing things that I'm not a fan of. Like, nope, don't like that, don't like that. Okay. But instead of just being like, oh, the world sucks and it used to be so much better and it's going to shit and like this blows, I'm like, no, it's the US Pluto return, right? It's gonna go to shit. And then it's gonna get rebuilt. Like I have that faith a lot because that's kind of just who I am, but also because I can see the patterns and the cycles like that the astrology is literally showing us in the sky. So I feel like it kind of gives us that piece of something to relax into that says like, nothing is ever permanent. Everything is always moving and continuing from like blending from one cycle to the next cycle. And every single cycle is making it better. There is no such thing as all dark or all light. Like it's all got all of it, and we're always moving in a better direction. So that is something that like, how do you prove that? That's one of those Gemini things is like, are we moving in a better direction or a worse direction? And that's one of those things that like does not have an answer. And I don't need it to have an answer to do like the opposite sign of Gemini is Sagittarius. So like in Gemini, we take in all of this information from the world. And then in Sagittarius, we get to decide like, what's true for me? What do I believe? and I've taken in lots of information, and I believe that we are always headed in the right direction. We're always getting better and better and better and better, and the world is always getting better. And yet I would never tell someone who says it's the opposite, I wouldn't tell them they're wrong, because from where they're standing, that's correct. And that's the beauty of Sagittarius, is that it allows us, it empowers us to find our own version of the truth and our own view of how the world works. The shadow of Sagittarius is that you're trying to shove that down somebody else's throat. That's where dogmatism and fundamentalism come into play in the shadow of Sagittarius. But at its height, it's really grounding to know what you believe, to be able to look at a really shadowy situation and say, no, I believe that we're always getting better. I believe that there is no such thing as a completely dark situation. There must be light inside of this somewhere. And if I'm in it and I be with it long enough, like, I will get to see the light for myself. Those beliefs are very Sagittarian, and they come out of, like, what have you observed and soaked up from your world? Let's see. Later this month, I'll have Pluto conjunct my diurnal ascendant. I expect on that day I'll project power in some way. That is going to be fun to see. I don't know what a diurnal ascendant means. And then, have you seen the US Sibley chart? I don't know about that either. Mercury in Aquarius. Oh, yes. I'm going to do this Mercury in Aquarius thing real quick, because up here, that was the answer to, okay, so I've been saying what you're saying for years, and most people can't stand me for it. I guess I'm truth over kindness, but lies are never really kind. And then I asked, what sign is Mercury in for you? And they said Aquarius. So, yeah, like, that's very air sign Mercury of you, that, like, true, like, lying to someone isn't kind. Like, it would definitely be more of a water Mercury to try to, like, protect somebody's feelings and, like, construct your narrative and your words to them to, like, protect their feelings, versus, like, Aquarius Mercury definitely has more of an eye on, one, individual empowerment, and two, like, the best possible future for humanity. And so again, like, by like by stunting the blows, or by, like, withholding the medicine of the truth, which in my opinion, I mean, I have Mercury and Gemini, a fellow air sign, so, like, I'm a big truther also, where, like, there's medicine in facing the truth. There's medicine in watching how you react to what's true. And granted, there's a lot of subjectivity inside of the truth. Like, I'm not saying there's not, but yeah, I I can't say that there's a right or wrong, because I think if you came with Mercury in a water sign in this example, then that's exactly what you intended. You intended to move through the world and express your thoughts in a way that was extremely considerate and compassionate to others. And so there are lots of scenarios where that's going to be helpful, where that's going to be, like, in your profession, where that's going to set you up for success and make you good at what you do, like in healthcare or other places where, like, customer service is number one. Keeping the peace with another person is number one. Um, that's not how I'm wired. That's not how Mercury in Aquarius is wired. So I think whatever your Mercury sign is, it's absolutely perfect. Just like the rest of your natal chart, it's exactly what you intended for it to be. Um, but I think it's also important to understand, like, here's how I'm wired, and I totally own that not everybody's like that. That, like, I'm not going to diss somebody else for doing it differently, or that their brain is wired differently. Like, there's people who, like, they just pay attention, and they're picking up every single one of these people that, like, I was so on top of the details of all the things when somebody else was, like, spacing out, like what Dolly's doing, like, it would literally piss me off. And looking back at that self now, like, all you can do is have compassion that I didn't know any better at the time. But, like, it really does give me that sense of empathy. Like, I don't want to judge anybody for the way their mind is wired. It reminds me of the Albert Einstein quote, like, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it'll spend its whole life thinking it's stupid. That's just not true. Like, every single one of us is brilliant in our own way. And yeah. So when we can recognize that like we are brilliant in the way we're wired, and even somebody who's wired the complete opposite, they're brilliant also. So that's what I practice, is like trying to see how does yours work for you, because the rest of your chart needs your Mercury to be the way that it is. That's the way that you best represent your thoughts and your inner knowing to the rest of the world. So it's all always good. Though there are kinder ways to tell hard truths. And that is an art form, I think. That Libra may even be the best at this, where like it's an air sign, but it is like almost the most harmonious with other people. So it's like, how can you be true to like intellectually, factually, logically, like here's what it is, like this is true, and maintain harmony all at the same time? Like politics used to be, and diplomacy, and like, discord, like back and forth. Like, how can we be respectful and tell our truth, right? Like, again, I think it comes back to like, do you need other people to agree with you or not? Because if you need them to agree with you, it's going to be very triggering to your ego if they don't. And at that point, the whole entire conversation basically shuts down. So yeah, but I'm a big believer. Your Mercury is exactly what you needed it to be. And that's been really helpful for me healing like a piece of my shadow, where there's part of me that definitely wishes like I was a little bit more professional in the way I spoke, and that my thoughts were more linear, and that, it'd be like beginning, middle, end, next story, beginning, middle, end. It's all organized and like professional presentation and all polished and everything. That's just not how I roll. Like, I'm a free associating mess of details, and it's on you essentially to see if you can like weave it back together into something that works for you. And that's just how I'm wired, Like, I don't have to be different. I don't have to be more professional. I can do it the way that works for me, the way that feels natural to me. And if you listen to the Book of Air, where Stephen Forrest talks about Mercury and your Mercury sign, it's like, if you want to be heard in this world, you have to talk with your true voice, AKA whatever your natural Mercury style is. That like, that's really the only shot that you have at being heard and taken seriously, is when you use your own voice. When you try to sound like somebody else, they tune out immediately, because there's no like genuine heart behind it. So yeah, I believe the whole natal chart is perfect, but that's just me. Do you have the moon in a water sign? No, I have the moon in Leo in the 5th house. My water is limited to Pluto in Scorpio, and then I have Mars and the North Node in Pisces. And my IC is in Cancer. So like my midheaven is in Capricorn and my IC is in Cancer. So I technically have planets or points in all 3 water signs, but it's a way more unconscious part of me, I would say, historically speaking. Like circa 2014, I was of the impression that I was a robot who had no emotions. That's how I thought about myself. And I went to a retreat, like a training retreat that my company sent me on with a bunch of other people that worked there. And one of the things that we did at that training was take emotional intelligence tests. And I was like about to vomit on the table as they were handing those back, because I was just positive that I was going to have like the lowest score in the class, that they're going to find out that I'm basically like a brick, that like, just no emotional intelligence going on whatsoever. Hello, Bola. And it was the opposite. I had the highest score in the class. And that was like a wake-up call of like, I'd spent the first 25 years of my life saying, I don't have emotions. And then it turns out actually you do, and they are sharply tuned. And maybe you go ahead and start using those to your advantage. And I was like, oh, and that was what opened me up to studying emotional intelligence. And that's how I found Brene Brown's work, and on and on and on. So like, the things that we think we know about ourselves, like, dude, sometimes we have no freaking clue, but maybe that's just me. Yeah. Fully, you caught us like right at the end. We're just chatting. Do you have any questions? How is Venus and Aries going for you, Fola? She's got, I'm pretty positive I remember Venus and Aries natally. So yeah, I was sharing early on, you'll have to see on the replay that like Venus moving into Aries this week has really lit my fire. And I expect that Jupiter moving into Aries next week is only going to throw some more logs, maybe squirt a little kerosene on that fire. But I mean, you know, as above, so below. Like this is the season for really igniting our Aries energy and honoring ourselves and what we rightfully deserve. And yeah, it's a beautiful backdrop to what's going on in the world right now. The other piece that about Aries that I feel like I gained out of watching The Handmaid's Tale, which was really interesting because Elizabeth Moss, who plays June in the Hulu series of The Handmaid's Tale, she has an Aries midheaven. And I mean, that just to me like is very similar to her character on the show in general, where it's like heavy Aries energy. What does that actually mean? Like if Aries is all about having courage, like, think about what that means. That means you have to be in situations where you're scared shitless. You have to face fear, meaning fear has to be present. In order to be victorious, there has to be an opponent, AKA an oppressor. Like, these kinds of things they just come with Aries territory. That, like, if you have an Aries chunk of energy that you're meant to work through in this life, like, expect some fears that you're going to have to face, expect some oppression that you're going to have to rise above. Like, all of these things are how that Aries sword gets sharpened. So yeah, it's kind of a package deal. Oh, Aries and Venus and Aries as well. Interesting. Feeling super fired up. Yeah. Right on time, I think. Because we talked about Aries back in March when the sun moved into Aries, like that third or fourth week of March. And we still had all of these in Pisces. And like, it's like every one of these planets. So far, we've only had Venus come out of Pisces, Aries. In a few days, Jupiter will do the same. In a couple weeks, Mars will do the same. So like every single one of those that's like being spit out of Pisces and back into Aries, like to start it back over at primal fire, like it's just going to ratchet it up until I think it's like, what was that, May 26th, where all in Aries at the same time on that day are Venus, the moon, Jupiter, Chiron, and Mars, all in Aries on May 26th. I put it on my calendar. I'm like, what is this? It's big. It's a big energy. That's like fire on fire on fire on fire on fire on fire. Yeah, May 26th. Looking forward to it. Yeah. It's like a potential nuclear explosion. I don't use those words lightly because, like, you know, legit. Like, what is it? There's something coming. But just like I was talking about with the Three of Swords, like sometimes loss is necessary in order to get us to act. Like sometimes heartbreak puts the fire in our belly that lets us move forward and face our fears and do things that we didn't know that we were capable of. So there's going to be, didn't even realize I keep my heart locked up. I'm so open all the time, but my heart chamber is locked away, taking the padlock off now. That's interesting. Oh, yeah, I would imagine Venus and Aries. Oh, this was another, I started to say this, I'm sorry, and then I trailed off Gemini Mercury. But watching Elizabeth Moss on The Handmaid's Tale, there were several instances where like the facing of her fear was her saying out loud, here's what I want. And like in the show, obviously life doesn't always work out like this, but in the show, it was like she finally said what she wanted. And then the other person was like, okay. And gave like, here's this, you can have it. This is what you want, you can have it right now, immediately. And all that was stopping her from having what she wanted was the ability to say it out loud. I want this. And so that to me like screams Venus and Aries as far as like, you know, yes, facing fears, and that sounds kind of scary, but what if the fear is something like, you know, I really like to be on top during sex, and my partner always just gets on top and never offers the position to me. And like, I don't ever say anything because they're enjoying themselves. And like, Venus and Aries is like, why don't you just say, I like to be on top, and then watch the other person go, wow, I love to be on the bottom. I was only being on top because I thought that that's what you wanted. I didn't know that you, it's like that. It's like, why not just say it out loud, whatever the thing is? And watch how often it was such a thin little barrier between you getting what you want or not. And the only thing that helps you cross it is being willing to say it out loud. So, yeah, that to me was like such a Venus and Aries type thing. And I feel like if you have Venus and Aries, count on that, that like you will not get what you want unless you say it out loud, period. That like you have to claim it, that like probably in relationships, you're the one that like lets your person know like, hey, I'm interested. You're the one that's like, hey, I'm ready to take this to the next level. Like, hey, I'm ready to, like, you're driving the boat. Like Venus and Aries is me, not in a bad way. Like, right? Like if that's where your placement is, like that's what you're meant to have. But that probably means that you will be on the leading edge of saying the thing that everybody else is too scared to say. So Mercury and Aries, I would say a lot the same thing. Like your job will be to say the things that everybody else is too scared to say. And watch how everybody's like, oh my gosh, I was thinking that. That's exactly what I wanted to, but I didn't think that you would go for it or like whatever. So yeah, I gotta think that especially when that's your natal placement, like those little hurdles of fear are how you honor yourself, like being willing to step over the fear and go for what you want. Almost always, I would imagine you're going to be rewarded by getting exactly what it is that you wanted. So, dude, I get it. Like asserting ourselves at all, like the fear of rejection is very powerful. In almost all of us, like we all have some kind of like hardwired biological understanding that when you're shunned from society, like the worst case scenario rejection, you're off in the wilderness by yourself, you're prey at that point. Like when we're out of civilization, like it's scary and dangerous for us. We're not meant to necessarily exist on our own. We're meant to be inside of a society, and that there's safety in that. So when we speak out loud that like, this is what I want, and we have the perception that this is going against the status quo, the risk for rejection is now on board. And it's like, do I want to just keep the peace? Do I want to just keep the status quo? Because at least then I know I'm in. I know I'm in here in safety, or I could say the thing and risk being pushed to the outside, which is definitely more dangerous. But I think like what you're cultivating is a self-reliance and a knowing that like, even if they push me to the outside of this group, if I get rejected by these people, that like, as long as I have myself, as long as I've done right by myself, I'll land on my feet. And every time that happens, I'm only going to find people who are a better match to me. That like, if they can't handle my truth, they're not my people anyway. Like that's kind of hard pill to swallow when you want to like take all your people into your next level of consciousness with you. Like, can't they all come with me? No, you can go. And if they're ready to go and they make their own journey there, then you'll see them there. But like, saying the thing and speaking your truth, even as risky as it can feel, is a way of honoring ourselves that like, I personally have never found like the equivalent. Like there is nothing quite like speaking your truth in terms of like putting it out there and, not trying to be mean. There are nice ways to say truthful things, but allowing the truth to come out, that is a way of honoring ourselves, and that like just builds the closeness between us and ourselves, and that self-reliance can literally get you through anything. So like you're building strength every time you face a fear. Like I have Mars in the 12th house, which Mars rules Aries, and the 12th house is a lot about hidden enemies, which is, it just sounds scary by nature, but like that's a lot what Mars in the 12th house is all about, is like anytime you find something that scares you, do it as soon as you can, because that's the initiation. Like when you find fear in your experience, like go towards it, move through it, and then watch the fear dissipate, no longer exists. And then find the next fear, move through that one, watch it dissipate, no longer exists. And after you've done that for a couple of years, you're bordering on fearlessness. You're bordering on, I've lived through so many things that I thought were going to tear me down, and they didn't. And now I know what I'm capable of. I know what I'm capable of surviving. I've looked the devil in the face. So now anything that happens is going to be better than that. And I trust myself to land on my feet in whatever situation I'm in the middle of. And that's, I don't know, that may be where my tendency comes from, as far as like when I do get scared, I go straight to worst case scenario and like mentally accept that that could happen. And I'm like emotionally processing, if that happens, here's how I'm going to feel. And like, all of these emotions flow through me. And I mean, then it lets you face the fear and move through it and watch it dissipate, and it no longer exists. So it's like when we're afraid of fear, that's when it has control over us. That's when we're paralyzed and we don't move forward. We stay stuck in our lives. Um, but when we recognize that fear, it's not, it's just an emotion. It's not like pain, I think, is a little bit different. Like imagine like the example where you put your hand on the hot stove and like you register a pain response and you pull it away. Like fear works like that. Like fear isn't signaling that you're getting weaker if you move in this direction. I think fear is signaling that you're getting stronger if you move in this direction, versus like pain. If you move in the direction of pain, typically you're getting weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. And that's why you back away. And fear is pain. And I think that's where people can like back away from fear. But I don't know, it's not the way. You got to go towards it, not away from it. And yeah, it's like, I think eventually, if you are stuck in fear, transits like Venus and Aries, Jupiter and Aries come along and push you out of it. Because what happened at the beginning of this live stream is a perfect example of like, I never planned to share my views on the subject, except I do plan to be here at this time. And this is the energy that's present inside of me. So I'm going to let myself honor that and say what needs to be said. And that doing this experience this morning has definitely given me a newfound sense of confidence in my ability to cover things that maybe are outside the scope of like what I normally want to talk about on this channel. But what I want to talk about on this channel is shadow work and being our authentic selves. And when I'm triggered by what's happening in the world, like that seems like a perfect opportunity to talk about those things. So yeah, it was a good experience of trying something that I'd never tried before. But the reason I did it was because I was so fired up by what it was that like there was no getting around it. So yeah, that fire can be really helpful to help us move past fears that we've been holding for a long time. That basically that fire can make the fear look smaller. And it does that by making you feel bigger. That like, that feeling where like you just like come to life in a whole new body and a whole new, oh my gosh. Yeah, ready to roar is how I felt this entire week. So I'm pretty excited to see what Jupiter entering Aries is going to feel like. Huh. Mm. Oh, Paula, I love you. I've also had people use my assertiveness against me. Like, well, you wanted me and I was just going along because you're so pushy, gaslighting me like a mother. Yeah. So those aren't your people. Those, see, okay, so no matter which end of the spectrum you're on, whether you are a doormat or you are breathing fire in people's faces, you will attract people who blame you for that behavior. And I think all of us are on that spectrum somewhere where like it's your fault you didn't speak up. Like you could say the exact same thing. Like I asked you a million times and you never told me. So it's your fault that we're in like, either way, I think when you're attracting blame, there's something a little bit deeper going on in terms of your own shadow work. Like the video that Dr. K posted, I think it was the yesterday one, but the rejection one, Maddie, can you grab the link to that? Where he talks about like, a fear of rejection isn't just about like getting over like how bad it hurts when you get rejected. It's actually starting a step ahead of that at a fear of rejection is born out of your own personal belief that you are rejectable. And if you believe that you are rejectable, then it hurts when people reject you or you perceive behavior that otherwise would be neutral as rejection. And so in this case, like where you're attracting blame, there's some guilt. Like blame and guilt go together like PB and J. Like that's just how it works. When you have guilt, you attract blame. When you're attracting blame, you have guilt. That's just what happens. So I would say it's not so much about them being offended and turning it back around on you, other than they are the mirror that has to reflect you to you. And if you feel like I'm too pushy and I'm too assertive and I shouldn't be this way, then you have to have an experience of someone else agreeing with you. That's just law of attraction, like attracts like. Um, so I would imagine that like as you grow up, you know, like as you grow into your energy, which I don't think growing up has anything to do with age. I feel like I'm just beginning to grow up in my early 30s. But as you get comfortable inside your energy, you start to realize I'm wired the way I'm wired, and it's perfect. You know, like if someone can't handle my fire, then they're clearly needing to get out of my kitchen. And that level of self-acceptance is like Teflon for blame. You know, like if somebody's blaming you for being so pushy, they aren't taking control in their own lives. They're allowing themselves to be pushed. And that's their shadow work. And I've been on that side way more often than I've been on the side you're describing, but they're the same. They're the same side where you're feeling bad about yourself. You're not accepting that like I am the way I am and maybe I'm exactly the way I meant to be. That these energies and these patterns and tendencies are setting me up for success to like actually live out the mission that my soul brought forth into this life. So that's one way to look at it. But then you see how fake everyone can be and you just rely on yourself. So that too, I think, is something of an attraction, because I think, you know, authenticity, there's another Dr. K video about like why we can't stop wearing a mask, and meaning like you're being inauthentic or you're being fake. So that video is really cool to understand. And I do think that like authenticity exists on a spectrum where like on one end you're being your full authentic self and on another end you're being fake. And the reasons that we are fake or that we put on a mask to begin with are actually really interesting and trace back to childhood, and how like it's a conditioned response. Like basically I was authentic before and it blew up in my face, or I said what I wanted and I got rejected, or I said what I wanted and they beat me for it. Like there are all kinds of ways where our own authenticity is not safe. It puts us outside the group and it gets us rejected. So we learn how to just forget about that and wear the mask that leaves us on the inside. We're like, we're not offending people, we're keeping the peace with everybody around us, and therefore we're minimizing the risk of rejection. But like, if you've been in that situation, like as a recovering people pleaser, where you eventually get to, or where I eventually got to, was very much a place where I was so full of contempt for everybody around me. And all of it was because I was not allowing myself to do what worked best for me. I was keeping the peace with everybody and resenting the fuck out of them all at the same time. So yeah, there's there's a limit to how far you can get being fake in this world, is my opinion. And there are legitimate reasons why people do that. And so it's hard to judge somebody for it. But basically, it's one of those situations where like they're afraid of fear. There's, you know, like whichever president it was that said, like, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. I think it was the one in the wheelchair, whichever that one was. Um, but yeah, it's like those people are scared of the reaction. The reason we be fake in a moment is because we're avoiding pain. And the reason that we think there will be pain in that moment is because there were pain in previous moments. So like we don't be fake for no good reason, usually. And the people who aren't strong enough to take off their masks yet, like that's what they're going through on the inside, is a process of self-acceptance, a process of like giving themselves a permission slip to be who they are in this world. And, you know, that's like, again, it's hard to judge. And it's especially hard to judge since I've been there. And I have compassion for myself at that stage of like, probably a solid like 25 years in the middle of my existence where, yeah, like when you're criticized for putting your heart and soul out there, and then somebody shits all over it, like you're way less likely to do that next time. And if it happens 10 or 20 times, like good luck ever getting your authenticity back out from under those scabs. But we heal, like especially like just natural, the wisdom of time. It does heal us naturally, especially when we let it, it happens that much faster. So I do think that, being authentic is obviously what I'm reaching for. I'm reaching for honoring myself and the realness of whatever's inside me at any given moment. But there's also compassion for myself when in a moment I'm fake. Like when I'm at the grocery store and I run into somebody that's like, "Hey, how are you?" You want to know what I say? 100% of the time, "I'm fine. How are you?" Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter how I am. I will avoid the interaction mostly. Every once in a while, somebody will ask where I'm like, "Oh, wow, they sound like they really want to know." Maybe I give them a little teaser and we'll see if they're like, "Oh, yeah, me too. I've been super busy." Like if they take it and run with it, I'm like, "Okay, that's all I give them." But almost exclusively, I'm like, "I'm fine. How are you?" So that's fake. That's fake behavior sometimes because sometimes I'm not really that fine. So there are reasons, and there is almost like, kind of like a strategic prerogative to get to choose, like, when am I going to be authentic and when am I going to be fake? And being fake is basically like a protection that we put around ourselves when we don't trust someone to give us a favorable response. And so I think about that too, as far as like, how can I, within my energy, through me leaning into my own authenticity, how can I encourage other people to come out of their shell? And that again is one of the things that I'm super excited about with Heart to Heart is like I I do want to be someone where people walk away thinking like, wow, she's really easy to talk to. Like I don't want to judge people. I don't want to like make a face at what they say where they know instantly that I'm judging them. Like I want to listen and I want to be open and I want to take it in and I want to allow for their truth to be whatever it is. That it doesn't need to line up with mine. And like I said, sometimes, you can't help but argue for your way, but we try. We try to open up as much as we can to let other people like be whoever they are and to basically like be a safe place. That like, if being fake is a protection mechanism, you only have to protect yourself from a predator, and I'm not a predator. Like you're safe here. You're safe with me, and I'll take in your truth and I'll give you nothing but love in return. That's my goal. Obviously, I'm human. So, yeah, I think there's room for all of it for us as individuals and in the mass population. I mean, especially with our current like social media type culture. I mean, fakeness and inauthentic identities like kind of run rampant, and that's really to the individual's detriment. Like I said, like you're only hurting yourself when you're denying your own authenticity. So I think eventually we all get tired of suffering in that trap and we wake up to who we really are and we do a little bit more concerted of an effort to like live in alignment with that authentic truth, and that we're all a work in progress somewhere along that spectrum. FTR, thank you. The one in the wheelchair. You knew who I meant. Whenever I've let myself hold on to anger or resentment, oh my God, my body is in so much pain. It's been a helpful barometer to let it go for my own sake. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, I genuinely think that the rise of gut issues and chronic illnesses, and I mean, there's so many things in our culture that, like, whether they just went unreported before and like we have a more, more everybody shares everything kind of thing. And so now we just know about it. But it also just genuinely seems like issues like that are more prevalent in today's culture. And I think so much of that comes from stress. And the stress comes from like disagreeing with other people, needing them to be different, being angry that they're not different, like whatever the case is. And then we hold on to that, and then you tear up your physical system. Like, we're not meant to hold that nasty toxic energy at all. It's like energy in general is intended to flow through us. And when we like, before these last few months, like I would feel myself like welling up with tears, like either hurt tears or I usually let the happy tears flow because they feel pretty good, but mostly the hurt tears or the mad tears, I would like feel them coming and I would like take a deep breath and like breathe them back down basically. And I was like, what does that do? That puts it back in there. That like creates a block now that's like in my flow of energy. And now energy can't get through as well because that block is in there. And that's another reason why on Wednesday and Thursday of this week, like I gave in. There's some powerful energy flowing through me. I need to cry it out. I need to yell it out. I need to write it out. I need to move this energy. It cannot get stuck back in there. Oh my God, it'll take me under with it. Like it's way too powerful for that. So yeah, you gotta let it go. And again, like forgiveness isn't for the other person. It's for you. It's for, hating someone. Like my poor mom, she has an issue with somebody that like it's just really triggering for her, and she's having a prolonged experience with really not liking this person. And every time I hear her talk about it, I just think in my mind, and I've said it to her a couple times, and she doesn't really, I don't know, resonate, I guess. But I tell her, I'm like, hating someone else is like drinking poison and wanting the other person to die. Like you're only hurting yourself. And she just can't hear me because he is such an asshole. And that's just where she's at. So, that's just where she's at. But that's true. Like any kind of that negative emotion that we hold on to, like it is only toxic to your system and anybody else that you're coming into regular contact with, which is usually the people we love the most. So yeah, don't hang on to that stuff. It's not good. Dude, I used to talk to people and tell them the truth on how I was feeling in the moment. And it took me a long time to realize that most people don't really care. And that made me self-conscious. Yeah. So there's a quote from Brene Brown that, because she's talking about like leaning into your vulnerability and like shame can't exist when you bring it out into the light. So like when you tell your story, you're reducing your shame and blah, 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 blah. But one of her biggest points is that not everybody's earned the right to hear your story, right? Like, right. Most people don't care. Most people are inside of their own experience, caring about their own experience. And they care about you so long as you fit into and impact their experience. And that's maybe a really, like, I don't know, whatever, like jaded perspective to have. But I think it's only natural that like we are all naturally self-centered beings. So most of the time when you ask someone, especially in like a really casual passing setting, like the grocery store, like I mentioned, when you ask somebody how they are, you're basically saying, hi. That's it. You're not actually asking how they are, which is why I'm a big, say that instead of like, hi, how are you today? Because that's like a natural response. Like I had to figure out when I very first started, at the grocery store, I saw real quick how true that was, because 37,000 times a day, people are asking me how I am. And it's like, they're saying it as hello. They're not actually asking me how I am. They don't want to know. They don't want to be burdened by how you are. That's not something that, like, I don't know, in my experience. And so, yeah, it's like I take my feelings to my journal, or I record a podcast episode, or I get the attention of one of my loved ones, or like whatever it is. But yeah, for the most part, people out in the world, like they got their own shit going on, And so you almost want to give them grace. Like, I understand that you are totally wrapped up in what you got going on, and that you don't mean that. So, and I saw that like when they would ask, I would say, I'm fine. And you should see how confused they look. How like not appalled, that's probably too strong, but definitely caught off guard that I wouldn't ask them in return. And that showed me they're only asking to get me to ask them. Because when you do that, when you say, I'm fine, how are you? 9 times out of 10, they'll tell you. And now you're hearing their life story about every single thing that's gone wrong in their day so far. And so, yeah, it's very interesting to like work in the public sector and face the public and have those kinds of interactions where you get to see like macro level, like how people are, like just kind of that natural behavior. Mm. Pain from resentment shows up in my throat chakra. Yeah, my trap spaz. That's like that's really interesting. I hadn't noticed that until right now, but like used to be that there would be times when like my muscles were just like having little seizures, and that it was like energy flowing through me that was so intense and had like enough resistance to it where it was like uncomfortable to be that like tense. And after I started making my podcast, and especially now with my YouTube channel, I don't remember having that experience recently. Like it's probably been 6 months or a year. And that used to be like almost every day. Like that was just kind of the natural state of my body, was like tense. But I think it was because I was holding all of that in, instead of now, like, I mean, I talk for hours every day, like kind of as my profession. So like that's really helpful for me. Like that's how my system is built. That's how much energy I have flowing through me. And the talking lets it come out, and then it's not in my body tearing it up. Mm, yeah. Yeah. Whenever I bite my tongue and feel resentful, I get a TMJ flare up, jaw clicking and pain. What is TMJ? Yeah. Yeah. Headaches, tension headaches, especially like all up the back of my neck, and like, or like a crick in my shoulder. Like I had a spot back here from a car accident years ago that like anytime I'm tense or like really pushing harder than I should, will lock up, and that'll slow you down. That'll like really draw everything into focus. Like, is it really worth like holding this back, or continuing to put myself in a situation where I do have to regularly hold myself back, where I'm showing up to places where I have to walk on eggshells? That's where, again, like the power really is ours. And that's where it exists, is how do we show up, and where do we show up, and when, and what are we willing to tolerate? Because, if I go somewhere and I have to walk on eggshells, like if I speak my truth, they freak out or get mad, I don't go there anymore. I don't speak my truth to them anymore, because I'm not trying to upset people. I'm trying to like empower other people to find their truth. And if all you're going to do is give me and tell me that's the worst idea I've ever fucking heard, you better believe that's our last conversation. So like there's a way to give criticism and to have conversations with people and to say what you need to say. But yeah, there's also what Brene says about like not everybody has earned the right to hear your truth. And that's for us to get to decide, or to stop engaging with certain people where it's clearly not safe to speak my truth. And I don't go places that I can't speak my truth. So I guess here we are. Assholes do abound. Yeah. You know what? Like, and yes. And the assholes, though, they walk up to you and they say things like, I cut my hair off right when I started dating Dolly. I had it like all the way up to here and like a little bob type thing. And I have curly hair, so it was like all out there. And I really liked it. I thought it was cute. And this guy, he's old, 75, I don't know, walks up to me and he's like, don't you know you should ask a man before you cut your hair? Yeah, you better grow that out. Like, no shit. That's what he said to me. Walked up cold, first things out of his mouth. So the assholes, they don't start with, are you fine? The sad ones do. That's kind of what I'm saying about like, it's the sad ones who are like, how are you? I'm like, I'm fine. How are you? And then they just, now here we are, like it's the people who like legit need somebody to talk to. And that's kind of the sad part of working with the public, is you see like how many people come in like every single day because you're probably the only person that they talk to today. And yeah, that's where like our frontline people, anybody working in public sector, like retail, not the public sector, but like retail, public facing, deserve way more credit than they get, because you're basically an unpaid therapist to most people that you come into contact with. Like, most people are carrying a lot of baggage and they're looking for the first possible place to unload it. And so when you have a kind heart and you say, "How are you?" and you even half genuinely mean it, like, most of them will give you some of their baggage. And so that was for me, I mean, working public facing is not sustainable for me because I can't care about 300 people a day. Like, that's not viable for me as a human being on this planet. Um, and I can't not care. When I say, "How are you?" Like, I legit want to hear an answer. But when you're the 300th person today, I really don't care how you are. And that side of me was not cool. And it just was a sign that, like, I'm pushing myself past my limits. I'm overextending my energy, yada, yada, yada. And so again, I try to take that same caring and channel it into a situation like this, where I do genuinely care about what you're putting in the chat. And I want to hear and I want to have a conversation back and forth. And like the sacred circle that we do over Zoom, where it's even more interactive and conversation back and forth. But for me, being in a grocery setting where, like, 10 hours a day, 5 or 6 days a week, you're talking to the public, and this is how a lot of people operate, in terms of carrying around more baggage than they even realize. And they're just, yeah, most of them a little too ready to dump it off at the first person who will take it from them. And then you come home and you're like, your grid is full of everybody else's shit. And now I got to, like, try to get that out of there before I got to be back at the store at 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. Like, this was not a good situation. Yeah, those first couple years of being at the grocery store were some of the hardest because of that reason, because people are sad. Like, so many people are so sad and they, like, don't even know what to do about it besides paste on a happy face. Granted, I'm in a rural setting, so, like, in this area, mental health is still heavily stigmatized. Like, the depression's a bad word, mental health is a bad word. Like, we just work harder. We just, like, pull up our bootstraps and we just, get over it. Like, boys, like, I mean, it's a very, like, traditional viewpoint on all of those things. And so what you get is a bunch of people walking around with unprocessed shit. And when your job on this planet is shadow work, they just seem to find me and dump it on me. So I put myself in here and I go online and I open myself up like this for just, like, a little bit of time at a time. It's beautiful. It's the best of all the worlds. TMJ is just when you have pain or issues with your jaw joints, definitely can be a factor in headaches too. Interesting. I had never heard of that. Yeah, I definitely notice, like, anytime I do a guided meditation and it's like, they, like, do the body scan or whatever, and they have you take your tongue and, like, release it from the top of your mouth, like, every single time, usually my tongue is, like, all the way up in there and my jaws are all clenched and I didn't even know. Like, I didn't even know I have all this tension going on in here until I remember, like, oh yeah, like, take your tongue off the top of your mouth. And then you're like, wow, that relief is insane. So I try to kind of like the butthole check that you do every once in a while. I do like the tongue on the top of your mouth check too. Just releasing tension out of the body as often as we can. Yeah. Okay, guys, I think I'm good for this day. I appreciate you hanging with me through a very all over the place live stream, very representative of the energy that we're in right now, kind of all over the place and a little bit fired up. So yeah, that's where I'm at. Sounds like some of you all are resonating with that. Um, I have pretty much begun as a pattern doing the Monday astrology energy update. So that'll be coming again on Monday. Um, and then, yeah, I'll be back next Friday with another live stream and am basically to the point of rededicating myself full time to owning authenticity, and so excited to see what unfolds in this newfound redevotion to this thing that I love so much. So thank you, thank you, thank you for being here. I appreciate you hanging out with me. Until next time, you take such good care of yourselves, and so will I. Okay, bye. Okay, bye.